All right, A&P1 students, we are going to continue on talking about anatomy and physiology in our first chapter. I wanted to share with you, I thought this was funny. I posted it, shared it on Facebook a few months back. So if you have cats, then this might make you chuckle because, yeah, they seem to have that sort of personality or attitude. If not, that's okay. So we're going to talk about, I think we were at objective 6. We're going to start talking about how the study of form and function, which you could also put anatomy and physiology here, studies of anatomy and physiology, how those two studies are interrelated. So you can't really separate them. You can, but if you really want to understand how the human body works, you have to have knowledge of both and understand how they relate to each other. So that's what we're going to start talking about first. So I want to show, I think it's on, there it is. So I'm going to show a video. Oops, let me stop it here. So what I'm going to show you is the elbow joint, a little animation. And if you're not familiar with the bones, I'll kind of give you a little information about them. So this is the humerus bone. So this is in your upper arm. And then we have the radius bone, which is in your lower part of your arm, and then the ulna bone. It's kind of hiding behind the radius. So we're kind of looking at the arm from a side view. So what I wanted you to notice is the shape of these bones, the end of the humerus and then the top of the radius and the ulna. The shape of those bones, they're a particular shape. They kind of fit together really nicely. And because they're that certain form or shape or anatomy, that will determine how they can function. So this is considered a joint where the bones connect together. And so how this joint is going to move is all dependent on the form or the structure or the shape of these bones here. So this little video is going to show the movement. All right, so that was the function of that elbow joint, which is flexion and extension. So this is an example of where the structure or form of these bones that are coming together and meeting here at the joint is going to determine what movement can happen at that particular joint. So when it comes to the elbow, flexion and extension are two of the main movements. So now if we go to another joint, like your shoulder joint or your knee, actually the knee joint's kind of similar, shoulder joint or your wrist joint, something like that, then depending on the shape of those bones that are connecting to form those joints will determine what movement can happen there. So like our shoulder joint's going to have, it can do flexion and extension, but it can do other things too because of the shape of the bones. So it can have other movements that happen there. So whatever the shape or form or anatomy of the bones or any part of the body, whatever that shape is, will determine its function, like what it can do and what it can't do. So this is an example of that form determines function concept that you should kind of be thinking about as you study A&P. So this is more gross anatomy because we can actually see these shape of these bones. And in lab you'll have an elbow joint, so you can get those elbow joints out and actually see it, see more of those surfaces too, more of the anatomies, not just a side view. Now this also happens in more on the microscopic anatomy level. So when we're looking at cells and their shapes, they're like different shapes or forms depending on what their function is. So like a little red blood cell is kind of disc shaped, and that's the perfect shape for it to carry oxygen. But then we have a neuron That's a cell in the nervous system that sends nerve impulses. It doesn't have a round kind of disc shape. It's got these long processes on it so that the signal can go from, cover a longer distance. So you can see it with the cells. You can see it with our, let me see if I can, yeah, there we go. You can also see it with down even to the little molecules that are in our human bodies. So this is an example, I think in chapter 3 we'll talk about enzymes. But if you're not familiar with them, we'll review. Enzymes are those molecules that are going to, they usually say catalyze a chemical reaction, or what catalyze means just to speed up. But in order for them to do that, they have to be a certain shape or form or have a certain type of anatomy. So this is an example. You can see the shape of this enzyme. And then this is the molecule that enzyme is going to cause a chemical reaction with. So the only way this enzyme can work and do that and like change this substrate or molecule is if it has the correct shape. And so you can see this one does, because these two fit together kind of just like a hand in a glove or a key in a lock kind of concept there. So it fits perfectly. And then this just kind of shows more realistically what an enzyme looks like, what molecules look like in the body. So this is showing, this is more of just a cartoon drawing, but so this is kind of showing the same thing. There's a little substrate and then the enzyme, and there's a little site on there that has the right shape for that little substrate. And if that has the right shape, then the substrate can bind, and then that enzyme can, break that molecule apart, or, add it, combine it with another molecule or something like that to cause a chemical reaction. So this has to be the right shape in order to do that. And we do have some diseases that can happen whenever we have these enzymes that aren't the right shape. So we'll talk a little bit more about PKU. So that's a disease where there's an enzyme that breaks down proteins in the digestive system, and it's some people have an abnormal gene, and so then they produce this protein that's not the right shape, this enzyme that's not the right shape. And so then that enzyme can't bind to like a protein and break it down. So then people that have that condition have to kind of watch what they eat, because they can't eat a large amount of proteins because they don't have the ability to break it down and use it in the body. So those are some examples of this concept of form determines function, I call it, or just how the anatomy and physiology are related to each other. And again, that's a concept that we'll all continue to revisit throughout A&P, and you should kind of keep that concept in your mind, because I always think about the shape of stuff determines how it can function. All right, and then number 7 is just describe the characteristics common to all living things. So this is talking about all living things, not just humans, but obviously we want to talk about I'll go back to our textbook. Oh, since I got to this page here, this is something that you'll see throughout the chapters, a concept overview. So it's kind of nice because it puts kind of all the information that you learned about in the chapter into a nice picture, and kind of connects that bits of information, so it kind of makes more sense. So that's what this concept, I call it a concept diagram. They call it a concept overview. But this is nice, since we've been talking about anatomy and physiology and the difference between them. This kind of concept overview talks about what anatomists think about when they are thinking about the small intestines. They're thinking about the length of them and what's the cells that make up their wall and those kind of things, just looking at the anatomy. Whereas the physiologists are more interested in how they're working. How does the cells in the wall of the small intestines work to break down the nutrients that we eat into smaller particles, and how those nutrients get into our body and things like that. So they use the small intestines as an example for that relationship between anatomy and physiology. So if you want to look that over, you can. That's a nice little concept overview. So that might help you recall things better if you have a little concept overview. All right, so back to the characteristics of, oops, we're going to go skip that one there. Yeah, so the characteristics that describe living things. I think this book breaks them down into 6, yeah. So there's 6 properties or characteristics that all organisms, which are living things, have in common or possess. So organization is one. So we'll talk next about the organization of the human body. But generally these living things are complex. So we talk about like the smallest things that make up an organism, and then we move on up to the more complex things that are formed by those smaller things. So it's very complex, but it's always organized in a logical way. And then metabolism, this is a term that we'll talk about and continue to use throughout A&P 2. So it's good to know this word because it'll pop up again and again. So metabolism, just the definition, is the sum of all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. So when we say chemical reactions, we're talking about when molecules are broken down into smaller molecules, or when molecules are combined with other molecules and then you make bigger molecules. So those are chemical reactions. So we have a little bit of both of that going on in the body. So like example, digestive system, we get a lot more, so in our small intestines, we're usually doing more breaking down of large molecules into smaller molecules. But then in our cells of our body, they need to make things in order to function properly. So we get a lot more of the building up. We take one molecule and combine it with a bond with another molecule, and then we get larger molecules that have a role in that cell for it to function properly. So metabolism is just the sum of all the chemical reactions that are occurring in the body. And there's millions of them happening all the time. So that's pretty much what runs our body, is all these chemical reactions going on. And then so now we know what metabolism is, some of all the chemical reactions. Like I said, they may be chemical reactions that are going to build things, so take small molecules and join them together to form larger ones. So there's a term that we'll again use as we go through A&P called an anabolism. So anabolism is the term for whenever small molecules are joined together to get like larger molecules. And then the chemical reactions where large molecules are broken down into smaller molecules, we call that catabolism. So that's catabolism. So metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions, and those chemical reactions could be considered anabolic reactions or catabolic reactions. All right, so that's another characteristic of all living things, is they have metabolism. They have chemical reactions going on within their cells and other parts of their body all the time. All right, and then growth and development. Everybody probably familiar with that one, so I won't talk too much about that one. So, all living organisms grow and develop and become more complex. Responsiveness. Again, that's kind of in the name, that makes sense. Or living organisms will respond to something that's in their environment. So it could be something outside the environment. So we might respond to putting our hand on a hot stove. That's an external environment. Or we might respond whenever, food enters our stomach. Our body will respond to that by, starting to release secretions and start breaking it down and contracting to mix it up. And then regulation. This is a lot of the processes, actually all the processes in the human body need to be regulated, so need to be kept in at a certain set point, like body temperature and blood pressure and heart rate. So we got a lot of regulation going on. And then reproduction, just what it means. So the living organisms are able to reproduce and produce new in our case, new organisms like humans through the process of sex. So, all right, I'm about up.